Let's review the last empirical study that we were looking at. It was by Ross and Sicoli. And what Ross and Sicoli discovered is we remember those things we have actively done, and we forget those things that we have not done. Tuck that one away. We don't get well spiritually if we're not honest. It's hard to face the truth. It's hard to change. All right, so in terms of self-deception and self-awareness, here's something that God does all the time. Some of you might know who Parker Palmer is. He's a gifted writer on the spiritual life, and he uses this phrase in talking about this movement from self-deception to self-awareness, disillusionment. But he puts a dash in between. You don't always need a dash with disillusionment. Disillusionment. Now here's what he doesn't mean. Here's what he doesn't mean. Because we can speak, for example, of becoming disillusioned with somebody, can we not? For example, if the word got out, and it's not true by the way, but this is an example. If the word began to spread across campus, Dr. Hall has been sleeping with students. This would not be a good thing. I'd lose my job. I'd lose my wife. I'd probably lose my kids. But it hasn't been happening, but say is a hypothetical. You would have every right to be disillusioned with me. You'd have every right to say, I thought he was like this. And that son of a gun is out violating the very things he's been saying in class week after week after week. I thought he was safe, and he's a scoundrel. That's not what we're talking about in terms of this kind of disillusionment. With this kind of disillusionment, as Parker Palmer speaks of it, what he means is this: Jesus Christ really loves us and delights in robbing us of the illusions we have about ourselves. That's how love acts. Let me say that again. Christ, I'll probably say it a little bit differently. Christ deeply loves us. And as he loves us, he strips away the illusions that we have about ourselves. I would like to think that I don't have a self-indulgent personality, but it's not true. I would like to think that I'm a man of immense patience. It's not true. It's not true. How do I know? Christ has brought me into situations where it's like he's held oftentimes through my friends, he's held up a mirror to my face and said, this is what you're like. This is what you're like, and you're going to have to deal with it if you're ever going to learn to love anybody. Just think of Peter at that point. Peter is a very complex individual, very complex, with great gifting, and as it turns out, wondrous courage, but very complex and woven into his gifts and the strong aspects of his personality. This is true for all of us. Think of Peter. Woven into his gifts and personality are weaknesses and habit patterns and ways of responding in certain situations that are absolutely disastrous for him and other people if he doesn't deal with it. And that's where change takes place. That's where change takes place. As Bonhoeffer puts it, the call to discipleship is the call to change. Now, one thing I've done over the years in this class, when the class was much smaller, is I would have students write out for me why change is so difficult and why we tend to back away from change, hide from change. And so I have an overhead here. These are responses from Eastern students to the question of change. Now the first one shouldn't surprise us because we've been saying it the whole semester. Change is hard. Change is difficult. Plato had something wonderful to say, and Willard quotes from him. Plato said that living well is an art. Living well is an art. That's Plato. Living well is an art. We are not born with the capability of living well. Actually, we are born with the capability of living poorly. We're wired for poor choices because of many of the issues we've already talked about in class. We're wired for poor choices. We're wired for self-centeredness. We're wired for self-indulgence. We're wired for anger and greed and malice and all that yuck. That's what we're wired for. It just seems like this is the way to live. And Plato and Aristotle too, and Jesus all say, no. If you're going to blossom as a human being, it's going to take discipline. It's like an art. It's like an art. For example, let me toss that up. Think of a violinist. And think of the beauty that a violinist produces when she plays a Mozart violin concerto of some kind. You just can't get enough of it, can you? It's just you just listen and listen and listen. And especially a professional, she walks out on the stage and she doesn't have any music. They have this ability to just memorize. And their bodies have memorized. Their hands have memorized this deep, deep complexity. And not only have they memorized it, and it's part of actually their bodies, but it looks so easy. It looks effortless. And they just get out there and away they go, and we're watching and listening, and in the back of my mind we're thinking, how could she do that? How can she do that? Plato, Aristotle, Jesus would all say, she can do that because of the hours and hours and hours she spent learning how to do it. First, when she was 3 or 4 years old, Mom came in with a little violin. Said, you might like this. Just fool around with it, play with it, whatever. And screeching starts filling the room, and the child is, oh, this is great, Mom. Screech, 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 great, screech, screech, screech. But she enters into a discipline. And that discipline over time, this is true spiritually too, the discipline over time leads to freedom. Freedom. For the violinist, freedom to walk out on a stage and release immense beauty. Living well is an art. Living well requires discipline. Living well requires commitment. Living well requires learning things that we simply do not know. You got a Bible? Take a look, for instance, at Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. Now this is Jesus Christ speaking. This is God incarnate speaking. If there was ever anyone who knew how to live and knows how to live, it is this man. How so? He created life. He created human life. He knows what's entailed. So he says this, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Now that's a promise. But note the verb. Note that imperative. Come to me. Don't stay where you are. Don't distance yourself from me. Don't make the mistake of thinking you're going to be able to learn how to live well if you keep away from me. And when we finally say, I need help in learning how to live, Christ, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Gabriel, Michael, all of them let out a hoot. They let out a hoot because that's the movement of the Holy Spirit wooing you and me to sanity. Wooing us to sanity. And to what I would call deep pleasure. We find the deep pleasure we're actually looking for. Come unto me. Come unto me. And we'll find what we're always looking for. Here's what some students have said. Immediate pleasure and gratification just seem like the easier path to take. And in some ways, it's true. It is easier. I just bought a box of Girl Scout cookies. And they're really good. I'm telling you. And I go home at night, I eat one. I think that was really good. I can eat another. I'll have one more. And eat the second one, and then, oh man, you can't believe how good that is. And then the struggle comes when I look at the label of the box and it says, each cookie is 800,000 calories. Right now, you are preparing for your next cardiac arrest. But there's pleasure involved. So, some said, and this is true, the easier path actually ends up being the more difficult path to walk. Have you ever fallen into some pattern of sin? And on a good day, when the Holy Spirit is drawing you home, you say to yourself, you know, when I got involved in this, I really thought ... I really thought I was going to get what I was looking for. And now there's just the taste of sawdust in your mouth. So I want to leave you today with a principle. And it's called the principle of first and second things. The principle of first and second things. Here's what it is. Think of number 2. Number 2 represents the philosophy of the hedonist. The hedonist. The hedonism is actually a branch of Greek philosophy from the Greeks. Some Greeks thought along this line, and they believed that the goal and purpose of life is the direct and immediate pursuit of pleasure. That's the hedonist. Now, Lewis was thinking about this, and from his perspective, he was thinking, wait, that's obviously not true. So he came up with this principle of first and second things. What he's arguing, if we talk about first things and second things, he's saying that there are certain values that are hierarchical. One is above another. You with me? One is above another. If so, some things can only be pursued and attained by pursuing higher things. It's a hierarchy of value. Contrary to the hedonist, Lewis argues that pleasure itself cannot, genuine pleasure, cannot be pursued directly. Cannot be pursued as a first thing. Rather, pleasure is a derivative value. Pleasure is derived from the pursuit of a higher value. Okay, I want to leave you with a question. I want you to write this down. As you look at your life experience so far, and this is common for all of us, so don't feel bad about this, but as you look at your life experience so far, where have you identified first things as second things, and where have you identified second things as first things? Whenever we do so, life will not make sense. It's like we're moving again against the grain of the universe. But if we move against the grain of the universe, it'll implode sooner or later.